If I can have your attention, we'll go ahead and get started. There might be a few more stragglers coming in with their coffees and cookies, which is great. Come on in, come on in. So I recognize a couple of new faces, and thank you for being here. This is a second part of a two-part series, and I'll start off by saying the same thing I said the first day. Daniel is a book full of great stories. There's 12 chapters. There's a lot of content, and Daniel lived through two kingdoms and became leaders in both of those kingdoms. So instead of trying to do all of Daniel, what I'm focusing on is Daniel when he was a teenager, taken into exile from Judea into Babylonian culture. And what must that have been like? And what did he have to deal with when he got there? So, and then in that sense, is there anything that we can take from Daniel's experience into our culture? So this is just an outline today. We're gonna do some quick review of some key ideas from last week to kind of get everybody on the same page again. Kind of ask the question, how did Babylon try to change Daniel's identity and to break his integrity with God? Laid that out last week. How did Daniel resist and protest Babylonian society? And then we'll briefly discuss this notion about the use of ends and means today. It's a concept that's been with us, but sometimes we kind of get them confused. Sometimes we say, well, the ends justify the means, or the means that we're doing won't get us to the ends we want. And so we want to talk briefly about that. And then lastly, where did Daniel find his internal peace and hope? So that's going to be a quick outline. We got about 45 minutes to do this. So we'll get through. I'm going to read some scripture, but there's so much. I'll paraphrase some and then just read some of the verses. And if I can multitask at the same time, I'll make sure you're on the same slide as I am. So this is a summary of last week's discussion. First of all, was there any question or anything new that people that were here last week kind of thought about as we were going through this that you might like to share? You don't have to, just curious. So right off the beginning of Daniel, King Nebuchadnezzar trivialized Daniel's God, Yahweh, by taking some elements from the temple and puts them in his, what we would call, museum with all the other gods. So he trivializes Daniel's God right off the bat. And then he tries to turn relative value things into gods, which we talked about. And some of those are listed. He only took the handsome, the wise, those with that word nobility, they had knowledge, etc. Those are the only ones that King took to Babylon. It was so as Daniel and his friends. And then immediately right off the bat, Daniel gives them new names. King Nebuchadnezzar gives Daniel new names. And so he's trying to reshape right away their identity. We looked at the similar cultural items of Babylonian culture. And they kind of match ours. They're extremely highly educated, advanced science, valued science, technology, governance by law. They actually wrote code for law, which became a template for other kingdoms. And they focused on wealth, class, and focused on making a name for itself. If you remember where the Tower of Babel comes from, it's from Babylon, and it's trying to make a name for their gods. And then a belief in over 3,000 gods, polytheistic culture. Now, what they did in that with gods is they took natural things, things that have value to all of us, and made it a god, turned it into an absolute god. And that will be part of the discussion of Daniel as well. Doesn't look like we have some of the same characteristics of a culture. So we looked at things that they took and made into gods. So Daniel absolutely is sovereignty of God. The culture, money, gold, and silver, which they had God names for, power, social status, education, science, technology, technique, the way you do things. And then I added this one. They had a worldview. They had a paradigm of how they looked at things, and they kind of worshiped that too. And Martin Luther reminded us that what our heart trusts is our God. So they put their trust in the things of relative value. And again, we recognize those in our society as well. So now to name and identity and integrity, excuse me. So just a question, has anybody been given a quote unquote Christian name? So, well, no, intentionally from some symbolic. So there used to be a tradition that at baptism you might be given a quote unquote Christian name. So
how about a kid?
Pardon?
Daniel and David, I think kids.
Yes. Well, this is the thing that blew me away the first time I heard it. Look at the definitions of their names. That is their identity. So, and everybody knew the definitions. These are English words translated from Hebrew. So when Daniel approached somebody, everybody knew God was his judge. Yahweh was his judge. So it was his identity. And so on the right-hand side, you can see the names that King Nebuchadnezzar gave them. So he renamed them. He's trying to change their identity from God is my judge to Bel protects his life, which is one of their polytheistic gods. Now, I found an interesting thing. It's one of the stories that you hear in our society at times, but you don't really think, it kind of floats in and out. Well, there was an article in the Seattle Times in 2021 about a Native American celebration down in Las Vegas. And I was reading it, and there was a descendant of one of the Native American tribes whose grandfather had been taken to a American boarding school. And one of the things they did was give him a Christian name. And also then strictly forbid their use of their native language and their culture. I'm like, now that's exactly what Daniel went through, and that it's actually embedded as a part of our national story as well. Um, the Hebrews named their children based on what they valued or aspirations they had for the newborn. So that's where the name Daniel means God is my judge. That's what Daniel's parents said. This would serve to remind Daniel and inform anyone who met him he belonged, where he belonged, to whom he belonged, and where the principles that governed him came from. So it was his integrity as well. In an attempt to make Daniel's worldview compatible with Babylonian philosophy, he was stripped of his Hebrew name and given a Babylonian one, Belteshazzar, meaning may Bel, a Babylonian deity, protect his life. And of course, immediately I think of Paul's saying in Romans, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. And essentially, that's Daniel's story. So he is in this place where his identity and his integrity is being challenged at every turn. And so the first chapter is just his story of being put into the King's College of Babylon and graduating, as the story ends, at the top of the class. The wisest of the wise. And so now we're going to move to the core of today's story, which is in chapter 2, takes all chapter, and King Nebuchadnezzar has a dream. And so this is before, so Daniel's now graduated from King's College, but he's not yet sitting as a leader in the king's court yet. He will after the story, but not yet. So what I want to do is I want to read sections of the passage, and then we'll talk about it a little bit. So again, I'm not going to do it all, so I'm going to have to summarize some of it. So Daniel and his friends had graduated from King College, and so it was the start of their new career when this happens. So at the intro to the chapter is this: King Nebuchadnezzar has a dream, and he wants his court of wise men to interpret it. But Daniel wasn't there. So at this point, King Nebuchadnezzar is talking to his council of wise men. The wise men want the king to tell him his story, and king refuses them. And so this is where we now pick up the reading on verse 8. Then the king answered, I am certain that you're trying to gain time because you realize that this is what I have firmly decided. If you do not tell me the dream, there is only one penalty for you. You have conspired to tell me misleading and wicked things, hoping the situation will change. So then tell me the dream, and I will know that you can interpret it for me. The astrologers answered the king, there is no one on earth can do what the king asked. No king, however great and mighty, has ever asked such a thing of any musician or enchanter or astrologer. What the king asks is too difficult. No one can reveal it to the king except the gods, and they do not live among humans. This made the king so angry and furious that he ordered the execution of all the wise men of Babylon. So the decree was issued to put the wise men to death, and men were sent to look for Daniel and his friends to put them to death. So welcome to Babylon. So a couple things to notice right at the very beginning. The king is questioning the integrity of the wise men. He's saying, if you're so wise, you can tell me what my dream is. But then the elite recognize that there is no one on earth who can do what the king asks, which becomes a problem in polytheistic theology. So let's move to the next section. So the commander of the guard goes, so I'm going to do an intro here. The commander of the guard goes to Daniel and tells him he is to be put to death. Daniel asks, what for? And the commander tells him, because of the decree. Daniel goes to the king and asks for time so that he might interpret the dream. Before he goes, though, or the king agrees, and then Daniel returns home and asks Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah to plead for mercy for God. So I heard one theologian said this is the first college prayer time, a group prayer time is around this thing. During the night, the dream was revealed to Daniel. Then Daniel prays the God of heaven and goes to the king. So now I'm going to pick up the text from there. Well, the king asked Daniel, also called Belteshazzar, are you able to tell me what I saw in my dream and interpret it? Daniel replies, no wise man, enchanter, magician, or diviner can explain to the king the mystery he was asked about. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. He has shown King Nebuchadnezzar what will happen in days to come. Your dream and the visions that passed through your mind as you were relaying in are these. As your majesty was laying there, your mind turned to things to come, and the revealer of mysteries showed you what is going to happen. As for me, this mystery has been revealed to me, not because I have greater wisdom than anyone else alive, but so that your majesty may know the interpretation, that you may understand what went through your mind. So he says, this is not me. This came to me from my sovereign God. In your hands he has placed all mankind and the beasts of the field and the birds in the sky. Wherever you live, he has made you ruler over them. You are the head of gold. After you, another kingdom will arise, inferior to yours. Next, a third kingdom, one of bronze, will rule over the whole earth. So a couple things. Your Daniel actually restate what the wise men said. No man can read your mind. This comes from God. And so God shared it with me. I'll share with you. So in essence, he's witnessing for God. The dream was revealed not for Daniel's sake, but for the king's sake, for what's to come. He's essentially telling King Nebuchadnezzar, your reign is going to end. And so let's go on to finish the interpretation. Finally, there will be a fourth king, strong as iron, for iron breaks and smashes everything. As iron breaks things to pieces, so it will crash and break all the others. Just as you saw that the feet and toes were partly of baked clay and partly of iron, so this will be a divided kingdom. Yet it will have some strength of iron in it, even as you saw iron mixed with clay. As the toes are partly iron and partly clay, so this kingdom will partly be strong and partly brittle. And just as you saw the iron mixed with clay, baked clay, so the people will be mixture and will not remain united any more than iron mixes with clay. In the time of those kings, which is the last one, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, nor will it be left to another people. It will crush all these kingdoms and bring them to the end, but it will itself endure forever. This is the piece of the vision of the rock cut out of the mountain, but not out of by human hands. A rock that broke the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold pieces. The great king has shown the king what will take place in the future. The dream is true and its interpretation is trustworthy. So, to kind of close the chapter, King Nebuchadnezzar kind of falls and praises Daniel and actually makes Daniel the head of all the wise men in the country, in the King Empire, and gives them a lot of gifts as well. But then Daniel asked him to appoint his friends, his three friends, as head administrators of Babylon. And the king does. So that's kind of how that chapter ends. So it ends with Daniel being the head of now the wise men in the kingdom, and his three friends being the head of Babylon. So a couple things to note through the dream. So this is these mineral elements identify kingdoms that are historic, and actually everybody now knows and reads about. At the time he said that, they didn't know. Now this is part of the argument among scholars, is that the Jewish scholars think he's a wise person, but they think that this was too accurate of a detail. He couldn't have prophesied all this with so much accuracy. So they attribute the writings to the 2nd century BCE. But as you notice, the 4th kingdom actually came after Greece and into Christ's time and into the 1st, 2nd century before they were. So Daniel's actually the dream show to the king was actually telling him about he's the head of gold, Babylon, the Medo-Persian Empire, which followed him, which was actually starts in chapter 5, is the silver. The Greek Empire is the bronze, which follows the Persians. And then the Roman Empire is the iron and the clay. And so he's actually laying that out. Now, at that time, they use the minerals as a metaphor. But history, looking back, you can see it just fall in place, which is another fascinating piece about Scripture, is that we sit out here in the 21st century and somehow we think it's mythical. It's like, well, no, science and history's contained. Now there's metaphor that we draw learning from, but in this case, Daniel's actually being a historian. So I have a question. Where in the New Testament do we hear the use of the metaphor of the rock? Speak up, speak up.
Versus Christ.
So Daniel is or the dream is foretelling of the establishment of Christ's church. The rock, that's the metaphor. it's consistent throughout Scripture as being used as the strength of Christ, the strength of, and it's used in the Old and the New Testament. That one kind of caught me. You know, it's really the thing for me that I found fascinating in this is, you know, as a young student, you think of the New Testament, you think of the Old Testament. And Daniel is one of those that bridges the gap. There are others that bridge the gap as well. But so anyway, so what Daniel was doing in this case was witnessing to the king about his sovereign God. He was not providing the wisdom. He was just taking the wisdom that God had given him. And that's holding true to your identity and your integrity. Now, we won't go into this, but there's the famous story of Daniel's in the lion's den. All right. Well, that actually comes at the beginning of the Persia Empire with King Darius, when his wise men, so you now have a new empire, his wise men talked the king into writing a law because they want to trap Daniel. The wise men want to trap Daniel to where you have to pray to the king for a month and you cannot pray to any other gods. When the wise men saw Daniel praying his 3 prayers a day, they went and reported it to the king. And the king didn't want to, he had heard of Daniel, the legend of Daniel, didn't want to put him in the lion's den, but they said, you have to, it's the law. So, yes, it's the law. So that's what gets Daniel into the lion's den, is because he still prays to Yahweh 3 times a day at his house. He's a resistor. Yes. Yes, he's a resistor. And so anyway, so that ends the story of the King's Dream. But you can see we're in the 2nd chapter. There's another 10 more chapters. You can see just how rich the stories are and the wisdom that they point to at the time. So now here's why resist and protest. So Daniel, also at the very beginning of the first or second verse in chapter 1 of Daniel, which we read last week, Daniel states and recognizes that God gave Judea to the king Nebuchadnezzar, which a historian would just look and say, no, the stronger army and country or nation took over Judea, captured it. Daniel doesn't see that. He sees the unfolding purposes of a righteous sovereign God. That's what Daniel sees. He makes a conscious decision to honor God regardless of the cost to him. And in so doing, became a witness for God. So you can see through Scripture a couple times it says Daniel, then it will say his given name, his Babylonian name. This always refers to Daniel, and then it's dropped after the Babylonian Empire died. You know, we're used to telling the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that's their Hebrew name, right? Because that's the name that was the culture was trying to put on them when they put them into the fiery pit. So that also kind of drops away after the, but it's the again goes back to the challenge that they faced, in which then we face as well, of the external pressures of society to get us to conform and align with whatever the values of what's going on. And Daniel is the example of resisting and protest. Here's the interesting, it's not interesting, it's just a fact of the history. In Daniel 4, towards the end of his reign, King Nebuchadnezzar confesses his faith to God, to Yahweh. There's a whole nother journey in there that could make a whole nother series of studies. But King Nebuchadnezzar's reigns ends with his conversion and confession. God is Yahweh. That's a pretty powerful statement. And then that ends in chapter 4. And then chapter 5 is the beginning of the Medo-Persia kingdom under King Darius. So now I want to talk a little bit about the challenge on this. This is my perspective, just some of my thinking, but try to capture it in these two quotes. The challenge of protesting in our society. Martin Luther King Jr. We will never have peace in the world until men everywhere recognize that ends are not cut off from means, because the means represent the ideal in the making and the end in process. And ultimately, you can't reach good ends through evil means. Because, to me, this is the metaphor, good metaphor, because the means represents the seed and the end represents the tree. So the means, whatever means you take, are planting a tree. The question is, do we know what seed we're planting with what the means that we're using? And is it going to get us the tree that we want? That's what Martin Luther King Jr. is saying about the challenge between the two. Jacques Ellul, I don't know if any of you heard of him or not. He is a Christian, a professor of sociology, calls himself a lay theologian. He was in southern France during World War II as a part of the French resistance movement. After the war was over, he was named in the southern province to rebuild the institutions of France. And he writes, he's written a couple of classic books. The Technological Society in 1954 is really almost like a textbook in sociology classes about what he was seeing, that we were falling into the same trap again. We're kind of just doing the same thing over and over again, the same thing that brought out the institutions, that brought out kind of some of the evil in World War II. And he says, our civilization is first and foremost a civilization of means. And the reality of modern life, the means, it would seem, are more important than the ends. It's a challenge where we kind of conflate, we want things to be a certain way, so we start doing something. And sometimes those seem to be disconnected. So I'm curious, and this is an open question. We get down the last 5-10 minutes. How do you see protests being used in our society today? And have they been an effective seed in the tree, whatever tree it is that we've been trying to plant?
Depends on what seed and who's planting it.
Okay, so it depends on, so can you develop that a little further?
No.
Okay. So the seed is an action taken. And so, one of the things I've struggled with a couple times, we live up north out of the I-5 corridor of Seattle, but a couple times there have been protests that closed down I-5 corridor. And sometimes I wonder, what seed are they trying to plant? I'm disconnected from them. I don't know. I know they have an objective I might be in favor of, but to me, sometimes there is a disconnect for me.
It's slodgy, your activity in life can be life.
Yes. Yeah. So I want to actually read part of the article of the Seattle Times from the Native American. So that's the headline. And they actually had a fun run, a K5 run. After the service or after the run, they had a traditional remembrance celebration and together with their tribe members. But this caught my attention. He has to announce that it's not a protest. This is not a protest. So the Stevens is can't pronounce Ku Stevens. He's a teenager. He's a runner that ran there. Told this gathering a circle on the school lawn. It's a remembrance. This is something we've heard from our past and is finally coming to light. Yes.
And it's their day of reconciliation.
Yes.
And people were wearing their orange shirts with Every Child Matters. And
Yes.
I'd say at least 10% of the people were. And in some ways it was so good to be, because it was bright, it took your eye, you made you stop and look and think, even just for a moment, about history and trying not to repeat what's happened in the past, and make change and saying, all right, this has happened and we do need to make reparations. We can't just say, oh, it's gone, it's over, but we need to also take that and then learn from it to move ahead.
Yes.
And I hear what you're saying here, and I was thinking about some of the things that are going on in our society. It's easy to pretend like those things haven't happened and we're just going to ignore that. But the idea that we don't want to ignore it if we're going
Right.
to, move ahead and make the world better.
Right. Right. Thank you. Thank you.
That that's being regarded as part of woke culture. The woke culture doesn't want to hear things about slavery. They don't want to hear things about treatment of Native Americans and such. They want to hear all the good things about America. But these other things are part of that woke culture that we
Okay.
just need to get out of the schools
Yeah.
and everything else. Yeah.
I think that, yeah, go ahead, sir.
Backwards to the seeds. I think some people are so busy planting the seeds, they have not given one thought to what kind of tree is going to come from it.
Yeah.
And sometimes they're surprised and unhappy, and sometimes they're surprised and go, oh, wow, this is awesome. But at the time, the means was far more important to them, the seeds, than the trees.
Yeah.
Well, in our society, we have maybe three ways to let our voice known, and that's through the vote, through peaceful protests, and by writing our congressmen and so on. What's happening is our peaceful protests are being shut down. And so, you know, a lot of us feel like our hands are tied as to what we can do to make things better and to protest what we see is going on that we don't agree with, which is the democratic way. So I support peaceful protest because that's our democratic way of letting our voices known.
Mhm.
So anyway.
Any other comments? Thanks. Well, my only objective was to cast out the recognition that one action leads to something else, and that the better we can reflect and think about whatever those are connected, then we can be more conscientious about the tree that we're planting. So I want to close with, so thank you for the comments and discussion. So I tried to summarize, and it's not linear. So any mathematicians in the room, it's a part of a Venn diagram. These all play together. You know, Daniel and his friends held true to their identity in God through resisting society's efforts to assimilate them into their polytheistic culture. By maintaining their focus on God, reminder, they did not know his plan for them when they were put into exile. Daniel lived a full life, and also King Darius made him head of a part of the leadership in the Persian Empire. But they knew his sovereignty, they knew his promises, and Jeremiah, what happened to that? Okay. Jeremiah was actually in Judea at the time Daniel was in Babylon. So they knew each other. So Daniel knew Jeremiah's teaching. And they knew God's glory. And at the end of the book of Daniel, in chapter 12:3, God is, through the angel Michael, giving him Daniel, talking to Daniel at the end of Daniel's life. And this is what Michael tells Daniel. Those who are wise will shine like the brightness of the heavens, and those who lead many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. That's the imagery of what Daniel's life was in his time and his place. By focusing on God, by recognizing God's promise, or honoring God's promises, and by giving God his glory. Daniel is a great book to read. I highly recommend it. Thank you.
Thank you.